The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under the door while Maya was getting her daughter ready for school. She found it after Emma had left, the paper still crisp and official against the worn hallway floor. 30 days. That's what the boldface type promised her. 30 days to vacate premises due to non-payment of rent. Maya picked up the notice slowly, her hands steadier than she expected. There is something almost clarifying about seeing your worst fear printed in black ink on white paper. No more wondering when it would happen. No more lying awake calculating impossible numbers. The crisis had arrived, and now she simply had to deal with it. She folded the paper carefully and placed it on the kitchen counter next to the other notices. Medical bills from Emma's emergency room visit last winter. A disconnection warning from the electric company. A letter from the car insurance company explaining why her policy had lapsed. The counter had become a gallery of failures, each document a monument to choices she'd been forced to make when there were no good options available. The apartment was small, but it had been theirs. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely large enough for a table. The walls needed paint. The carpet was stained in places she couldn't explain. But Emma had her own room, and the school was walking distance. And for 3 years it had been enough. Now even this shabby refuge was slipping away. Maya made coffee from the last grounds in the container, letting the bitter smell fill the kitchen. Outside, the morning traffic was building, the sound of engines and horns filtering through thin windows. The world kept moving whether you could afford to be part of it or not. She had learned that lesson thoroughly over the past 18 months. Ever since the layoff had turned her life into a constant calculation of what could be postponed, reduced, or abandoned entirely. She thought about calling her mother, then decided against it. The conversation would follow a familiar pattern. Concern, then criticism, then the inevitable suggestion that Maya should have made different choices years ago. As if insight into the past could change present circumstances. As if knowing where you went wrong was the same as having a way forward. The truth was simpler and more brutal than her mother understood. Maya had made the best choices available to her at every turn and still ended up here. Single mother, no degree, work history fragmented by childcare needs, and employers who valued flexibility only in one direction. The job she could get paid just enough to stay poor. The jobs that paid better required credentials she couldn't afford to obtain while also keeping Emma fed and housed. She had tried. That's what burned most. The night classes abandoned when childcare costs exceeded tuition. The promotion she'd been promised, then watch go to someone else. The second job that had lasted 6 weeks before exhaustion and Emma's teacher's concerned phone calls forced her quit. She had tried everything reasonable people suggested, and here she was, holding an eviction notice with no plan and no options. Her phone buzzed. A text from her supervisor at the coffee shop where she worked mornings. Could she cover an extra shift? Maya calculated quickly. The additional hours would help, but Emma had a half day at school, and the after-school program cost money she didn't have. She texted back yes anyway. She would figure out the rest later. That's what she always did. By the time Emma came home that afternoon, Maya had composed herself. She'd learned to carry crisis quietly, to keep the weight of adult problems away from her daughter's awareness. Emma was 8 years old. She deserved to worry about homework and playground friendships, not whether they'd have a place to sleep next month. "Mom, you okay?" Emma asked, dropping her backpack by the door. The question came with a sharpness that made Maya's chest tighten. Emma had always been observant, reading moods the way other children read picture books. It was a skill no 8-year-old should need. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a long day." Maya managed a smile that felt almost real. "How was school?" Emma shrugged, moving into the kitchen with the casual assessment of a child who'd learned to check for problems. Her eyes swept the counter, lingering on the stack of papers. Maya had forgotten to move them. "What are those?" "Just boring adult stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." Maya turned the papers face down, but the gesture felt too late. "Did you eat the snack I packed?" Emma nodded, but her attention remained on the counter. "Are we moving?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Maya felt the ripples of it spreading, disturbing the careful calm she'd been maintaining all day. She could lie. She wanted to lie. But Emma would know, and the lie would make everything worse when the truth eventually forced itself into visibility. Maybe, Maya said carefully, we might need to find a different place soon. Because we don't have enough money. It wasn't a question. Maya closed her eyes briefly. Because things are tight right now. But we'll figure it out. We always do. Emma was quiet for a moment, her small face serious in a way that made her look older than she should. Can we move somewhere with a yard? Even a small one? The request was so simple, so achingly reasonable, that Maya felt something crack inside her chest. A yard. Not a mansion. Not luxury. Just a patch of grass where a child could play. And she couldn't promise even that. I'll try, baby. I promise I'll try. That night, after Emma was asleep, Maya sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and began searching for options she'd already exhausted. Cheaper apartments were scarce and required deposits she didn't have. Shelters were full and had waiting lists. Friends and family had their own struggles and small spaces. Every path she could see ended in obstacles. She was about to close the laptop when a notification popped up, an email from a law firm she didn't recognize. Her first instinct was to delete it, assuming it was spam or another collection notice dressed up in official language. But something in the subject line made her pause. Estate settlement. Immediate attention required. Maya opened it, expecting nothing. The email was brief and formal. It informed her that her grandmother, Margaret Helen Kowalski, had passed away 6 weeks earlier. The estate had been settled, and Maya was listed as a beneficiary. She was requested to contact the firm regarding property transfer. Maya read the email 3 times. Her grandmother. She hadn't spoken to the woman in over a decade, not since her mother had severed that relationship in one of the many family fractures that Maya had learned to navigate by staying silent. Grandma Margaret had been a distant figure, more myth than memory. A stern woman who'd lived alone, who'd made choices that divided the family in ways Maya had never fully understood. The idea that Margaret had left her anything felt surreal. They'd barely known each other. Maya remembered visiting once as a child, a small house with a larger garden, somewhere outside the city. Her grandmother had shown her the vegetables, explaining their growth patterns with a precision that had seemed excessive to a 7-year-old who just wanted to play. After that visit, contact had stopped. Her mother had never explained why, and Maya had learned not to ask. She clicked the phone number in the email, surprised to find herself calling at nearly midnight. The line rang 4 times before an automated message played, professional and impersonal. Office hours were 9 to 5. She left a message, stumbling over her words, not sure what to say beyond confirming her identity and asking for more information. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Maya lay awake, turning possibilities over in her mind. Property could mean anything. A storage unit full of old furniture. A timeshare in a retirement community. It almost certainly meant nothing that would solve her immediate crisis. But the timing felt like something more than coincidence. A message arriving just when she'd run out of options. The lawyer called back the next morning while Maya was covering the extra shift at the coffee shop. She stepped outside to take the call, the December air sharp against her face. Ms. Torres? This is James Chun from Whitmore & Associates. Thank you for returning my call. His voice was professional, but not unkind. I'm calling regarding your grandmother's estate. Are you familiar with the property at 4782 Old Mill Road? Maya searched her memory. No, I don't think so. It's a residential property about 40 minutes outside the city. Your grandmother owned it outright. As her sole surviving heir, the property transfers to you immediately upon completion of the paperwork. He paused. I should mention, Ms. Torres, the property has been vacant for some time. It requires work, but the land itself is paid for, and the title is clear. Maya leaned against the coffee shop's brick wall, processing this information. A house. An actual house. What kind of work? Substantial work, I'm afraid. The structure has been neglected. There's water damage, overgrown vegetation, and according to the last assessment, several code violations. The property was appraised at $1,200 in its current condition. $1,200. The number should have been disappointing. Instead, Maya felt something shift inside her. $1,200 meant nearly worthless by market standards. but also meant possible. Possible to take ownership. Possible to explore. Possible to try. What I need to do. The lawyer walked her through the process. Paperwork to sign, fees that amounted to less than $200, a title transfer that would take a week to finalize. He gave her the address and suggested she visit the property before committing to anything. His tone implied she'd likely walk away once she saw it. Maya finished her shift in a daze. That evening, she told Emma they were going on an adventure. She didn't mention the eviction notice or the impossible situation they were in. She just said they were going to look at a house that used to belong to her grandmother. Emma's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement that made Maya's throat tight. They drove out early on Saturday morning, following directions on Maya's phone through increasingly rural roads. The city fell away gradually, replaced by open land and scattered houses set back from the road. Maya hadn't been this far out in years. The landscape felt unfamiliar, but not unwelcoming. Old Mill Road was narrow and poorly maintained. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to something that might have been a road once, but now resembled a suggestion carved through weeds. Maya drove slowly, checking the numbers on mailboxes that appeared sporadically. Most were empty. This was the kind of place people left rather than moved to. She almost missed 4782. The mailbox was tilted, its numbers faded to shadows. She pulled onto what might have been a driveway, though vegetation had reclaimed most of it. And there, set back behind a tangle of wild growth, stood her inheritance. The house was smaller than she'd expected. Single-story, wood frame, with a roof that sagged visibly at one end. The siding was weathered to the color of old bones, several boards hanging loose or missing entirely. Windows were covered with plywood or clouded with years of dirt. The front porch listed to one side, its steps broken in places that made them look like a mouth with missing teeth. Emma was quiet beside her. Maya felt the weight of disappointment settling over them both. This wasn't a house. It was a ruin, a structure that had given up fighting time and weather and was slowly surrendering itself back to the earth. "Is this it?" Emma asked finally, her voice small. Maya wanted to lie. She wanted to say there'd been a mistake, that the Real house was somewhere else, somewhere better. Instead, she turned off the engine and looked at her daughter. "Yeah, sweetheart, this is it." They sat in silence for a moment longer. Then Emma unbuckled her seatbelt with a resolve that surprised Maya. "Can we look inside?" Maya hesitated. The structure didn't look safe. But Emma was already opening her door, and Maya found herself following, drawn by curiosity stronger than caution. The front door was locked, but the wood around the handle was so soft with rot that a gentle push made it swing inward, the frame offering no resistance. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. Water damage had left dark stains across the ceiling and walls. The floor felt soft in places questionable underfoot. Furniture sat where it had been abandoned, covered in sheets that had aged to the color of the dust that coated them. Maya moved carefully, testing each step. Emma stayed close, one hand gripping Maya's jacket. They walked through what had been a living room, then a kitchen where cabinets hung open and a rust-stained sink sat beneath a window, so filthy it blocked most of the light. "Mom, look." Emma pointed toward the back of the house. Through a doorway, they could see what might have been a sunroom once. Glass panels formed part of one wall, though several were cracked or missing. Beyond the glass, wildness had taken over completely. They made their way to the sunroom, navigating around fallen plaster and suspicious soft spots in the floor. The back wall was mostly windows, and through the grime, Maya could see the garden. Or would have been a garden. The space was massive, extending far beyond what she'd expected. What had once been cultivated beds were now jungles of overgrowth. Vines had claimed every surface. Trees and large shrubs formed a dense wall at the edges. At the center, barely visible through the chaos, stood what looked like the remains of organized planting areas. "It's huge," Emma whispered, pressing her face close to the glass. Maya felt something stir in her chest. The house was unsalvageable, or nearly so. But the land was extensive, and land, even wasted land, had value. More than $1,200, certainly. If she could clear it, make it presentable, maybe she could sell it for enough to solve their immediate crisis. A few $1,000s would mean breathing room, time to find better work, to find a place they could actually afford. The idea took shape quickly. She had 30 days before eviction. 30 days of desperation that could be redirected into work. Physical work, clearing, and cleaning. It would cost her nothing but time and effort, both of which she had in painful abundance. And if Emma was out here with her, in open space and fresh air, that solved the childcare problem that had been bleeding her dry. She looked down at her daughter, who was still pressed against the window, eyes wide with possibility. What if we try to fix this place up? Emma turned to her, hope and doubt mingling on her small face. Can we? Maya didn't know. She had no experience with renovation, no savings for materials, no real plan beyond desperation and the refusal to give up. But she had a title that would be hers in a week. She had land no one else wanted. And she had 30 days before the worst happened. We can try. They spent the rest of that day exploring the property more carefully. Maya took photos on her phone, documenting every damaged board and water stain. She made notes about what would need immediate attention and what could be ignored. The foundation seemed solid, at least in most places. The roof was the biggest problem. Water had gotten in and spread damage throughout the structure. But the garden kept drawing her back. Even choked with weeds and wild growth, its bones were visible. Someone had planned this space with thought and precision. Raised beds formed geometric patterns. Pathways wove between them, though now barely traceable. At the center stood something massive and organized, though Maya couldn't quite make out what through the overgrowth. As the afternoon light began to fade, they locked up as best they could and started the drive back to the city. Emma fell asleep in the passenger seat, exhausted by possibility. Maya drove carefully, her mind already working through logistics. She would need tools, a few basic supplies, permission to camp on the property, maybe once the title transferred, ways to minimize cost while maximizing progress. It was desperate. It was probably foolish, but it was something she could do with the resources she actually had, and that made it more real than any other option she'd been able to imagine. The eviction notice was still on the counter when they got home. Maya looked at it differently now. 30 days wasn't a countdown to disaster. It was a timeline, a challenge. She'd faced worse odds before and survived. Maybe that was the only skill that really mattered. The ability to keep trying when trying felt impossible. She threw the notice away and opened her laptop. Time to figure out what it actually took to clear land and make something beautiful from what everyone else had abandoned. The paperwork came through faster than Maya expected. 5 days after her first visit to the property, she received a thick envelope containing the deed, transfer documents, and a letter from James Chun confirming that 4782 Old Mill Road was now legally hers. She spread the papers across the kitchen table that night after Emma was asleep, reading through each page with a mixture of disbelief and determination. The deed listed the property boundaries, the square footage of the house, and the acreage of the land. 2.3 acres. Maya had to look up what that meant in practical terms. Roughly 100,000 square feet. The number felt impossible. She'd spent years living in apartments measured in hundreds of square feet, and now she owned land measured in acres. But ownership, she was learning, was a complicated concept. The property was hers, but it came with obligations. Property taxes, though minimal for land assessed at $1,200. Liability for the structure. Responsibility for code violations that had accumulated over years of neglect. The county had sent a notice along with the deed, informing her that the property was classified as uninhabitable and could not be occupied without significant repairs and inspection. Maya read that notice 3 times, looking for loopholes. She couldn't live there legally, but could she work there? Could she spend her days clearing land and her nights back in the apartment until the eviction went through? The notice didn't specifically prohibit daytime presence. It was a thin distinction, but she'd learned to survive on thin distinctions. She began planning with the methodical attention she usually reserved for stretching grocery budgets across impossible timelines. She had 25 days before eviction. Her work schedule at the coffee shop gave her mornings, which meant afternoons and weekends were available. Emma's school day covered most of the prime working hours. The logistics were tight, but possible. The biggest obstacle was tools and supplies. Maya made a list of absolute necessities. Work gloves, a rake, garden shears, a machete, maybe for the thicker growth, trash bags, basic safety equipment. She calculated the cost, then calculated it again, looking for cuts. Even buying the cheapest versions of everything, she was looking at close to $200. Money she absolutely did not have. She considered asking for help, then dismissed the idea almost immediately. Her mother would see it as proof of Maya's poor judgment. Friends were scarce, worn away by years of canceled plans and borrowed money never fully repaid. The few people she still spoke to were dealing with their own struggles. Economic hardship had taught her that the safety net everyone talked about was mostly theoretical. Instead, she turned to online marketplaces, free sections, yard sale groups, people giving away things they no longer needed. She spent hours scrolling through listings, sending messages, coordinating pickups. A rake with a cracked handle, free if she could get it by the weekend. Garden gloves, well used but functional from someone downsizing after a move. A machete that had seen better days, $5 from a garage sale 3 neighborhoods away. She took extra shifts when they were offered, pushing her hours to the edge of what her body could handle. The additional money went straight into the property fund. $15 here, $30 there. It accumulated slowly, painfully, but it accumulated. Emma noticed the change immediately. Maya had always been busy, but this was different. This was focused, purposeful. Maya caught her daughter watching her, sometimes with an expression that was hard to read. Not quite worry, but something adjacent to it. Awareness that their lives were shifting again, though the direction remained unclear. Are we really going to fix that house? Emma asked one evening while Maya was reviewing property photos on her laptop. Maya looked up. I'm going to try to make it better. Make the land worth something, so maybe we can sell it. But what if we could live there instead? The question hung in the air between them. Maya wanted to shut it down immediately. The house was too damaged. She had no money for repairs. The whole idea was unrealistic. But Emma's face held something Maya recognized. Hope. The dangerous kind that made you vulnerable to disappointment. The house needs a lot of work, sweetheart. More than I know how to do. But the garden? We could fix a garden, right? Maya thought about the overgrown space she'd glimpsed through dirty windows. Maybe. That's what I'm planning to start with. Emma nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. She returned to her homework, but Maya noticed her daughter glancing at the laptop screen occasionally, studying the photos of the wild garden as if trying to imagine what it might become. The first day of serious work came on a Saturday. Maya loaded everything she'd acquired into her car, careful not to scratch the seats with the machete blade. Emma insisted on coming, and Maya didn't have the heart or the childcare options to refuse. They drove out in the early morning, the sun just beginning to burn off the low fog that clung to the rural roads. The property looked even more overwhelming in the clear morning light. Maya parked and simply stood for a moment, taking it in. The house slouched behind its screen of overgrowth. The garden sprawled beyond it, a chaos of green and brown that seemed to mock the idea of human control. She'd researched land clearing online, watched videos, read articles. None of it had prepared her for the physical reality of what she was facing. Where do we start? Emma asked, pulling on the oversized gloves Maya had found for her. Maya pointed toward the edge of the garden closest to the house. We start small. Clear enough space to see what we're actually dealing with. They began working. The first hour was encouraging. The outer edges of the garden were mostly tall grass and weeds, things that pulled up relatively easily. Maya used the machete to hack through the tougher stalks, while Emma gathered what had been cut and dragged it to a pile they were building away from the house. But as they worked deeper into the garden space, the growth became more challenging. Vines had woven themselves into thick mats. Bushes had grown large and woody, their roots deep and stubborn. Saplings had sprouted wherever seeds had found purchase, some now thick enough to require serious effort to remove. Maya's hands blistered inside the gloves. Her back began to ache in ways that made her realize how sedentary her normal life had become. Emma worked steadily beside her, attacking the vegetation with a determination that made Maya's chest tight. Her daughter shouldn't have to spend her Saturday doing manual labor because her mother couldn't afford rent. She should be at birthday parties or watching cartoons or doing any of the things 8-year-olds were supposed to do. Instead, she was here, pulling weeds from a garden that belonged to a grandmother she'd never met. By noon, they'd cleared perhaps 20 square feet. Maya stood back, wiping sweat despite the cool temperature, and surveyed their progress. It was almost laughable. The cleared patch looked like a tiny scar on the face of the overwhelming wild. At this rate, clearing the entire garden would take months, time she absolutely did not have. She sat down heavily on ground that was more moss than soil. Emma collapsed beside her, breathing hard. They shared the sandwiches Maya had packed, eating in silence while the reality of the task settled over them. "It's really big," Emma said finally. "Yeah, it really is. Are you going to give up?" The question was asked matter-of-factly, without accusation. But Maya heard the fear beneath it. Emma had watched her mother fight and lose too many times. The layoff, the apartment, the countless small battles that ended in retreat. This must look like another one. Another thing that promised hope and would deliver disappointment. Maya looked at her daughter, at the dirt smudged on her cheek and the determination still visible in her eyes despite the exhaustion. She thought about the eviction notice, about sleeping in their car, about shelter waiting lists, and the systematic way poverty ground people down until giving up felt like wisdom. "No," Maya said quietly. "I'm not giving up." They worked until sunset. By the time they packed up to leave, they'd cleared perhaps 50 square feet. Not much, but more than nothing. Maya's entire body ached. Her hands were raw despite the gloves. She would feel this tomorrow in every muscle. But as they drove home, she found herself already planning the next day's work. Which section to tackle, how to work more efficiently, whether there was a faster way to remove the stubborn vines. Sunday morning came too early. Maya woke with her body screaming protest. Every movement reminded her of yesterday's labor. But she got up anyway, made coffee, and woke Emma. They drove back out to the property and started again. The second day was harder than the first. Her body hadn't recovered, and the novelty that had carried her through yesterday was gone, replaced by the grinding awareness of how much remained. But she kept working, pulling and cutting and dragging, watching the cleared area expand with painful slowness. Emma began to wander while Maya worked. The property was large enough that her daughter could explore without leaving sight. Maya watched her drift toward the areas they hadn't reached yet, peering into the dense growth as if trying to see what lay beneath it. "Mom, there's something weird here," Emma called out around mid-afternoon. Maya looked up from the stubborn root system she'd been battling. Emma was standing about 30 feet away, near what looked like particularly dense overgrowth. Maya set down her tools and walked over, grateful for the excuse to rest. "What did you find?" Emma pointed into the tangle. "Look at how the plants are growing. They're in a pattern." Maya looked where her daughter indicated. At first, she saw only chaos. But as she studied it more carefully, Emma was right. The larger plants, the ones that had grown thick and woody over years, weren't randomly distributed. They formed rough lines, rows that had become obscured by time and neglect, but were still visible if you knew to look for them. "It's the old garden beds," Maya realized. Someone planted all of this deliberately. She stepped closer, pushing aside some of the surface vegetation. Beneath the wild growth, she could make out the edge of a raised bed, its wooden frame rotted but still maintaining its shape. She followed the line of it, seeing how it connected to another bed, then another, forming a grid that extended deeper into the overgrown space. "Your grandmother must have been quite a gardener," Maya said softly. She tried to imagine the woman she barely remembered spending time out here, carefully tending plants that had long since died or gone wild. It felt strange to think of Margaret as someone who'd gotten her hands dirty, who'd built something growing and alive. Emma was already pushing further into the growth, following the lines of the old beds. "Mom, there's so many of them." and they're all connected by these paths. Maya followed, more carefully. The paths Emma had found were completely overgrown now, but once Maya knew to look for them, they were obvious. Narrow walkways that wove between the raised beds, creating access to every section of the garden. This had been a serious operation, not a hobby. Someone had designed this space for production. They spent the rest of the afternoon mapping what they were finding. Maya used her phone to take photos, trying to capture the pattern of the old garden hidden beneath the new wildness. She sketched rough diagrams, noting where beds were located, how the paths connected, where larger structures appeared to be lurking under particularly dense growth. As they worked their way deeper toward the center of the garden, the growth became even thicker. Vines here were old and woody, some as thick as Maya's wrist. Trees had established themselves, their canopies blocking light and creating a dim, tunnel-like space. It felt less like a garden and more like entering a small forest. "I can't get through here," Emma said, frustrated. She was trying to push aside a particularly dense wall of intertwined vines and branches. Maya came to help, using the machete to hack at the barrier. The blade caught on something solid beneath the vegetation. Not wood, something that rang when struck. Metal. She worked more carefully now, cutting away the covering growth. A structure emerged gradually. Metal framework, heavily rusted but intact. Glass panels, most cracked or missing, but some still in place. It took her several minutes to understand what she was looking at. "It's a greenhouse," she breathed. The structure was larger than she'd expected, maybe 12 feet square. It had been beautiful once, Maya could tell. Well constructed, with attention to ventilation and light. Now it was a skeleton, claimed by the same wild growth that had taken everything else. But was still there, still standing. Emma squeezed through a gap in the vegetation to get closer. There's stuff inside, tables and pots and things. Maya followed, moving carefully. The greenhouse floor was barely visible beneath fallen leaves and growing weeds, but she could make out the remains of a workspace. Potting benches along one wall, shelves that had collapsed under years of neglect and weather. Clay pots scattered and broken, tools so rusted they'd fused with the dirt. And at the back of the greenhouse, against the far wall, stood something that made Maya stop completely. A door, heavy wood, set into the ground at an angle, like the entrance to a cellar or root storage. "What's that?" Emma asked, moving toward it. "Don't touch it," Maya said quickly. She approached slowly, studying the door without opening it. It was secured with a rusted padlock, the chain looped through a metal hasp that had been bolted into the wood. Unlike everything else, which showed the effects of years of exposure, this door looked maintained. The wood was weathered but not rotted. The lock was old but not broken. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling afternoon. Someone had secured this deliberately. And unlike the house, which had been abandoned to decay, this door suggested something worth protecting. She took photos of it from multiple angles, then stepped back. The sun was getting low, and they needed to start the drive back if they wanted to get home before dark. But she found herself reluctant to leave, her mind already churning with questions about what might be stored beneath that locked door. The drive home was quiet. Emma fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by 2 days of physical work. Maya drove on autopilot, her thoughts on the greenhouse and the sealed door. It was probably nothing. Storage for gardening supplies, or maybe a root cellar. Old properties like this often had underground storage, tornado shelters, places to keep vegetables cool through the summer. But the lock bothered her. If it was just storage, why secure it so carefully when everything else had been left to rot? That night, after Emma was in bed, Maya searched online for information about Margaret Kowalski. She found little. An obituary that listed no surviving family beyond Maya herself. A few property records showing when Margaret had purchased the land decades earlier. No social media presence, no news articles, nothing that suggested Margaret had been anything other than a private person who'd lived quietly and left no trace. Maya expanded her search, looking for information about the property itself. Old Mill Road had once been part of a larger farm community, she discovered. In the early 1900s, the area had been dotted with small family farms. Most had been sold off or abandoned as farming became less viable. The land had been absorbed into larger operations or left to revert to its natural state. She found an old photograph from the County Historical Society's archive, a black and white image from the 1950s showing the area before development. In the background, barely visible, was a structure she thought might be her property. The resolution was too low to be certain, but the location seemed right. She saved the image and continued searching, going deeper into archived newspapers and historical records. Most of it was mundane. Crop reports, property sales, notices about road maintenance. But then she found something that made her pause. A brief article from 1972 buried in the classified section of the local paper. It mentioned a robbery at a bank in the city. The thieves had gotten away with an undisclosed amount. Several suspects were identified, but never apprehended. The case had gone cold. Maya almost dismissed it as unrelated. But one detail caught her eye. The article mentioned that investigators believed the stolen money had been moved out of the city, possibly hidden in rural properties. Several locations had been searched, but nothing had been recovered. She sat back, staring at the screen. It was a reach, a connection that existed only in her imagination. But the timing was close to when Margaret had purchased the property, and the locked door in the greenhouse suddenly felt less like simple storage and more like something else entirely. She closed the laptop, telling herself she was being ridiculous, letting desperation create narratives where only coincidence existed. Margaret had been a gardener. The greenhouse was a ruin. The locked door led to a root cellar full of nothing but spiders and rot. But as she lay in bed that night, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Maya couldn't stop thinking about that lock, about the care someone had taken to secure something while letting everything else decay. The next week passed in a blur of work and exhaustion. Maya continued her shifts at the coffee shop while spending every free hour at the property. Emma came with her when school was out, helping where she could, exploring where she couldn't. The cleared area grew slowly. 20 feet, 40, enough to see the shape of the original garden beginning to emerge. Other people started noticing their work. A neighbor from down the road stopped by one afternoon, an older man who introduced himself as Harold. He'd known Margaret, he said. Used to see her working the garden years ago, before her health failed and she'd moved to a care facility. She was particular about that garden, Harold said, looking around at the cleared areas. Spent every day out here. Some people thought she was crazy, working that hard for vegetables she could have bought at the store for less than the effort cost her. Did she say why she did it? Maya asked. Harold shrugged. She wasn't much for explaining herself, but I got the sense it wasn't really about the vegetables. Some people just need to have their hands in the dirt, you know? Helps them think. He walked around a bit more, then paused near where the greenhouse stood, still mostly hidden by growth. She was protective of that old greenhouse. Wouldn't let anyone near it. I offered to help her tear it down once, after a storm damaged part of the roof. She near bit my head off. Maya felt that chill again. Any idea why? Like I said, she didn't explain herself. Harold tipped his hat and started walking back toward the road. Good luck with the place. It could be something nice again with enough work. After he left, Maya stood looking at the greenhouse. The locked door seemed to stare back at her, daring her to open it. She thought about Margaret, working this garden alone, protective of the greenhouse, securing something she didn't want anyone else to access. That evening, Maya made a decision. She drove to a hardware store and bought a bolt cutter. It cost $40 she absolutely shouldn't spend. But the question of what was behind that door had become impossible to ignore. She needed to know, not just out of curiosity, but because she was the legal owner of the property now. Whatever was there, she was responsible for it. She didn't tell Emma about the bolt cutter. The next day, while her daughter was at school, Maya drove out to the property alone. She'd cleared enough of the path to the greenhouse that she could access it relatively easily now. She stood in front of the angled door, the bolt cutter heavy in her hands. For a long moment, she just looked at it. Once she cut the lock, there was no going back. Whatever was inside would become her problem to deal with. But she was already drowning in problems. One more wouldn't make much difference. She positioned the bolt cutter on the lock and squeezed. The rusty metal resisted, then gave way with a crack that echoed in the quiet garden. The lock fell to the ground, and the chain slithered free. Maya set down the bolt cutter and pulled the door open. It was heavier than expected, the hinges protesting despite the care that had been taken to maintain them. The door swung up and back, revealing steps leading down into darkness. She brought a flashlight. She turned it on and pointed it into the space below. The beam caught stone walls, hand-hewn and carefully fitted. This wasn't a simple root cellar. This was something more substantial. A room, underground, deliberately constructed. Maya descended carefully, testing each step. The air was cool and dry, remarkably so for an underground space. Someone had engineered ventilation. At the bottom of the steps, her flashlight revealed a space about 10 feet square. The walls were stone. The floor was concrete, poured smooth and level. And in the center of the room stood a vault. Not a safe, but an actual vault. Heavy steel, old but well-maintained. The kind banks used before digital security. The kind that required a combination to open, spinning wheels in precise turns. Maya stood frozen. Her flashlight beamed steady on the vault door. Her mind raced through explanations. This was storage for valuable garden seeds. This was where Margaret kept family documents. This was anything except what it looked like. But she knew what it looked like. She'd found articles about bank robberies and stolen money. She'd inherited property from a woman who'd been secretive and protective. She was standing in a hidden room, looking at a vault that had no reason to exist in a vegetable garden. She circled the vault slowly, examining it from all angles. There was no combination visible, no instructions. But on the floor near the base, she noticed something scratched into the concrete. Worn and faint, but deliberate. Letters forming words. She knelt and angled the flashlight to see better. The letters resolved into words. A name. Not Margaret's name, but another one. Partially obscured by years and dirt, but still readable. Her grandmother's maiden name. Kowalski. No, not Kowalski. That was the married name. This was something else. Something Margaret had marked here deliberately, in a place no one was supposed to find. Maya pulled out her phone and searched her email for the documents the lawyer had sent. She scrolled through the estate paperwork until she found what she was looking for. Margaret's full legal name. Margaret Helen Kowalski, née Morrison. Morrison. The name scratched into the floor was Morrison. Maya stared at the letters, then at the vault. Her hands were shaking. This wasn't coincidence. This was a message, or a clue, or was something Margaret had left behind for someone to find. She thought about the plants growing wild above her head, about how Emma had noticed they formed patterns, about how the paths between the beds created routes through the garden, connecting everything, about how nature, even when it went wild, remembered what had been planted there. She climbed back up the steps and emerged into daylight, blinking against the brightness. She walked quickly through the cleared sections of the garden, looking at the raised beds with new eyes. They weren't random. They formed shapes. Letters, maybe? She couldn't tell from ground level. The pattern was too large, too spread out. She climbed onto the remains of the greenhouse roof, carefully testing the metal framework before trusting it with her weight. From this elevated position, the garden revealed itself differently. The raised beds, the paths between them, the way certain areas were denser with growth than others. Letters. They were definitely letters. Large enough that you'd never see them from the ground, but visible from above. Natural camouflage, formed by the wild descendants of Margaret's careful planting. Maya took photos, lots of them, from every angle she could safely manage. Then she climbed down and transferred the images to her laptop. She spread them across the screen, trying to piece together what she was seeing. The letters weren't complete. Years of wild growth had obscured some, and others had been lost entirely. But enough remained. Mrriswen, the same name scratched into the floor. Margaret's maiden name, spelled out in vegetation across 2 acres of carefully planned garden. Maya sat down hard on the ground, her mind reeling. She was sitting in the middle of a message her grandmother had left in living plants, pointing toward a vault hidden beneath a greenhouse, secured with a name that connected everything. What had Margaret done? What had she hidden? And more importantly, What had she left behind for Maya to find? The sun was starting to set, and Maya needed to get home before Emma's school let out. But as she locked the greenhouse door behind her, replacing the cut lock with a new one she'd bought at the same time as the bolt cutter, she knew everything had changed. This wasn't just an overgrown property anymore. It was a puzzle, a secret, something Margaret had constructed with patience and precision, designed to reveal itself only to someone who took the time to really look. Maya drove home in a daze, barely aware of the roads passing beneath her tires. Her mind was full of vaults and names and patterns and plants, of bank robberies and stolen money and locked doors, of a grandmother she'd never really known, who'd left her more than just property. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with Emma, helping with homework while her thoughts spiraled around the vault. She hadn't told anyone what she'd found. Not yet. She wasn't sure what she'd found, really. A vault could be empty. The name could be coincidence. She could be building an elaborate fantasy out of rust and weeds and desperation. But deep down, she didn't believe that. Margaret had left a message. Maya had found it. And somewhere beneath that garden, secured in a vault bearing her grandmother's maiden name, was something worth hiding. Something worth protecting for decades. Something that might change everything. The eviction was 13 days away now. Maya looked at Emma's bent head, her daughter's hand carefully forming letters for a spelling assignment. She thought about the letters formed in plants above a hidden vault, about messages left across time, about women who made choices and lived with consequences. Whatever was in that vault, she was going to open it. She had to, not just because she needed what might be inside, but because Margaret had gone to too much trouble to hide it from Maya to simply walk away. Tomorrow, she would figure out how to open a bank vault without a combination. Tonight, she would sit with her daughter and pretend that everything was normal, that their biggest worry was spelling homework and not homelessness, that the future held possibility instead of just fear. But in the back of her mind, a single thought repeated itself like a prayer. Please let there be something in that vault. Please let Margaret have left more than just a puzzle. Please let this be the answer we need. The letters in the garden spelled Morrison. The name on the vault matched. And Maya was going to find out what her grandmother had hidden, even if it took every hour of the 13 days she had left. The next morning, Maya woke before her alarm, her mind already racing with the problem of the vault. She'd spent half the night researching bank vaults online, falling down rabbit holes of locksmith forums and safe-cracking videos. What she'd learned was both encouraging and discouraging in equal measure. Old vaults like the one she'd found were mechanical, not electronic. That meant no digital bypasses, no technical hacks. But it also meant they were vulnerable to time and patience. The combination mechanisms could be manipulated if you knew what you were doing, or if you were willing to spend hours listening to the subtle clicks of tumblers falling into place. Maya had neither expertise nor time. 13 days until eviction. Even if she spent every waking hour trying to crack the vault, there was no guarantee she'd succeed. She needed another approach. She thought about calling a locksmith, then dismissed the idea immediately. Any legitimate locksmith would ask for proof of ownership, want to know why she couldn't provide the combination, might even report a suspicious request to authorities. And if the vault did contain what Maya was beginning to suspect it contained, involving official channels seemed like a spectacularly bad idea. Instead, she focused on what she did know. Margaret had left clues. The name spelled in plants. The name scratched in concrete. These weren't random. They were breadcrumbs left by someone who wanted something found, but only by the right person. By family. By someone who would take the time to look closely enough. If Margaret had left clues to find the vault, maybe she'd left clues to open it too. Maya got Emma ready for school, going through the morning routine on autopilot. Her mind was elsewhere, turning over possibilities. She dropped Emma at the school entrance and drove directly to the property, not bothering to stop at home first. The coffee shop would have to do without her today. She called in sick, the first time she'd done so in over a year. The lies sat uncomfortably, but the truth was impossible to explain. At the property, she went straight to the greenhouse. The replaced lock clicked open easily with her new key. She descended into the underground room, her flashlight beam sweeping across the vault once more. In daylight, filtering down from above, the space looked less ominous, but no less mysterious. She examined the vault more carefully now, not just looking but searching. The combination dial was standard, numbers from 0 to 99, arranged in a circle. 3 rotations usually, right, left, right, or some variation. Millions of possible combinations. Impossible to guess randomly. But Margaret wouldn't have expected random guessing. She'd left a name. Morrison. What if that was more than just identification? What if it was part of the key? Maya pulled out her phone and opened the calculator app. She assigned numbers to letters. M was 13, O was 15, Doubler was 18, I was 9, S was 19, another O, and N would be 15 and 14. The sequence would be 1315181891911514. But vault combinations were typically 3 numbers, not 8. She tried adding them. 13 plus 15 plus 18 was 46. 18 plus 9 plus 19 was 46 again. Interesting coincidence, but 2 numbers weren't enough. She needed 3. She tried different groupings, different mathematical operations. Subtracting, multiplying, looking for patterns in the digits themselves. Nothing felt right. The numbers either exceeded 99 or didn't produce anything that felt intentional. Frustrated, she sat back and forced herself to think differently. Margaret had been a gardener. She thought in terms of plants, seasons, growth, not mathematics or codes. The answer would be something simpler, more intuitive, something meaningful to Margaret personally. Maya climbed back up to the garden level and walked through the cleared areas, looking at the plant-spelled letters again. From the greenhouse roof, she could see them clearly now. Morrison, but something about the way they were formed nagged at her. The beds weren't uniform in size. Some letters took up more space than others. Not because they were different letters, but because they'd been given different emphasis. She counted the raised beds that formed each letter. M used 7 beds. O used 6. The first are used 8. The second are also used 8. I used 3. S used 7. The second, O used 6. N used 7. 7, 6, 8, 8, 3, 7, 6, 7. Too many numbers. She tried grouping them again. First 3, 7, 6, 8. That worked. Too high for most vault dials, but possible. Second 3, 8, 3, 7. Possible. Third group, 6 to 7. Only 2 numbers. That didn't work. She tried reading it differently. What if it wasn't about the number of beds per letter, but about the position of certain letters? M was the 13th letter of the alphabet. O was 15th, or was 18th. But she'd already tried that approach. Maya walked back to the greenhouse, this time examining the structure itself more carefully. The framework was ornate for a simple garden greenhouse. Decorative elements had been worked into the design. Numbers, she realized. Old house numbers, the metal kind people mounted on fence posts and mailboxes, had been incorporated into the frame as decoration. They were so weathered and overgrown that she'd missed them before. She pulled away the vines carefully, revealing each number. 4-7-8-2, the property address. She'd seen it on the mailbox, on the deed paperwork. 4782, Old Mill Road. But vault combinations needed 3 numbers, not 4. Unless. Maya felt her heart rate pick up. Unless you use the numbers in combination. 47 to 82, still only 2 numbers. August 2nd, 47, 3 numbers. That could work. Or 4-78-2, also 3 numbers. She climbed back down to the vault, her hands shaking slightly. She spun the dial to clear any previous attempts, then carefully turned it right to 47. Left past 47 twice, stopping at 8. Right again to 2. Nothing happened. The vault remained locked. She tried the other combination. For -78-2, still nothing. Maya sat back, fighting disappointment. It had felt so right. The house number incorporated into the greenhouse where the vault was hidden. It should have been the answer. But vaults weren't opened by should-have-beens. She took a break, climbing back to the surface to clear her head. The sun was high now, approaching noon. Hours had passed in what felt like minutes. She needed to think more clearly. Margaret had been clever, but not cruel. She left clues that family could find. The answer was here. Maya was just missing the connection. She walked through the garden again, this time paying attention to everything. The raised beds, yes, but also the paths between them. The placement of the old trees. The location of the greenhouse relative to the house. The way water would flow during rain. Everything Margaret had designed into this space. That's when she noticed something she'd overlooked before. Near the base of one of the old fruit trees, partially hidden by undergrowth, was a stone marker. She knelt and cleared away the weeds. It wasn't a gravestone, but it was similar in shape and permanence. Granite, weathered but intact. And carved into its face were numbers. June 14th, 1952. A date. June 14th, 1952. Maya pulled out her phone and searched for Margaret's information. Her birth date, listed in the obituary, was March 22nd, 1931. So this wasn't her birthday. What happened on June 14th, 1952? Margaret would have been 21 years old. Maya searched for historical events on that date. Nothing significant came up. No major news, no obvious connections. She tried a different approach, searching for Margaret Morrison 1952 in case her grandmother had kept her maiden name for some public record. One result appeared. A marriage license. Margaret Morrison to Donald Kowalski. June 14th, 1952. Her wedding date. Margaret had married on June 14th, 1952, taking her husband's name and becoming Margaret Kowalski. But she'd marked her maiden name in the garden and her wedding date in stone. These meant something to her, something worth preserving. Maya looked at the numbers again. June 14th, 1952. Could be that simple. She'd need to convert it to a 3-number sequence. June 14th, 52 maybe? Or 61-45-2. Different variations danced through her mind. She practically ran back to the vault, her breath coming quick with anticipation. She tried June 14th, 52 first. Right to 6, left past 6 twice to 14, right again to 52. The dial resisted at 52, like something was catching. Maya's pulse hammered in her ears. She applied steady pressure, and with a solid click, she felt something give way inside the mechanism. The vault handle turned. Maya froze, her hand on the handle, suddenly terrified of what she might find, or might not find. The weight of 13 days until eviction pressed down on her. The years of struggle, of choosing between rent and groceries, of watching her daughter grow up without stability or security. This vault represented either salvation or just another disappointment in a long series of them. She pulled the handle. The door was heavy, but it swung open smoothly on hinges that had been maintained with the same care as the lock. The interior was dark. Maya pointed her flashlight inside. The beam caught metal first. Boxes, stacked neatly, filling most of the vault's interior. Not safe deposit boxes, but something older. Lock boxes, maybe a dozen of them, each about the size of a shoebox. They were dusty but intact, arranged with the same precision Maya had seen in the garden design. She reached for the nearest box with trembling hands. It was heavier than expected. She pulled it out and set it on the concrete floor. No lock, just a simple latch. She opened it. Cash. Bundled stacks of bills, wrapped in paper bands that had yellowed with age. Maya's brain stuttered, unable to process what she was seeing. She pulled out one stack, noting the denominations. $100 bills. Old ones from before the redesigns. She tried to count, but her hands were shaking too much. 50 bills per stack. $5,000 per bundle. Multiple bundles per box. She opened another box. More cash. And another. And another. Each one filled with carefully bundled money, preserved in a space that had kept them dry and safe for decades. Maya's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the floor, surrounded by open lockboxes, her mind unable to grasp the enormity of what she'd found. This wasn't a few $1,000s hidden away for emergencies. This was serious money. Life-changing money. Money that had been hidden in a bank vault, inside an underground room, beneath a greenhouse, in a garden that spelled out the name of the woman who'd put it there. She forced herself to calculate methodically. 12 boxes. If each contained the same amount as the one she'd opened, and each bundle held $5,000, and each box held multiple bundles. The numbers climbed into ranges that made her dizzy. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Possibly more. The bank robbery. The article she'd read about stolen money hidden in rural properties. The timing of Margaret's purchase. The secrecy, the security, the elaborate precautions. It all made horrible sense now. Maya's grandmother had stolen this money, or hidden it for someone who had lived her quiet life above a fortune she couldn't touch without drawing attention, had designed a garden that could only reveal its secret to someone patient enough to clear away decades of overgrowth and clever enough to follow the clues. And now that secret belonged to Maya. She sat there for a long time, trying to sort through the implications. This money was stolen, probably from the 1972 robbery, which meant it had been sitting here for over 50 years. The bank was likely long since compensated by insurance. The original owners of the money were long gone. The statute of limitations on the crime itself had expired decades ago. But that didn't make the money legitimate. It didn't make it clean. It belonged to someone, even if that someone was now an insurance company or a defunct bank's assets division. Taking it would be theft. Using it would be profiting from crime. There were laws about this. Consequences. Maya thought about those consequences. About lawyers and police reports and investigations. About Emma losing her mother to prison time because Maya had been desperate enough to use stolen money. About the right thing to do versus the survivable thing to do. She thought about the eviction notice. About 12 days left. About sleeping in her car with an 8-year-old daughter. About job applications rejected and bills she couldn't pay and a future that looked like nothing but more struggling. And she thought about Margaret. About a woman who'd hidden money and never used it. Who'd lived modestly while sitting on fortune. Who'd designed an elaborate system to hide something she couldn't or wouldn't touch. Why? What had stopped her? Fear of getting caught? Guilt? Or something else? Maya closed the lockboxes carefully and stacked them back in the vault. She couldn't make this decision now, with adrenaline flooding her system and fear clouding her judgment. She needed time to think clearly, to understand what she'd really found and what it meant. She sealed the vault, spun the dial to lock it again, and climbed back up to the garden. The afternoon sun felt surreal after the darkness underground. The world looked the same as it had this morning, but everything had changed. She was standing on top of more money than she'd earned in 10 lifetimes of coffee shop shifts. Money that could solve every problem she had. Money she couldn't legally touch. The cruelty of it was almost funny. Almost. Maya drove home in a fog. She picked up Emma from school and went through the afternoon routine automatically. Homework, dinner, bath time, bedtime story. Every normal activity felt absurd when weighted against what she discovered. She was tucking in her daughter while sitting on the knowledge of $500,000 in stolen cash hidden beneath a vegetable garden. After Emma was asleep, Maya returned to her laptop. She searched for information about the 1972 robbery more carefully now. The newspaper article she'd found before was sparse on details, but she dug deeper. Found microfiche archives, police reports from the era, news coverage from multiple papers. The robbery had targeted a bank that primarily served businesses. The thieves had gotten into the vault during a weekend, taking cash that was meant for payroll and business operations. The amount stolen was never publicly disclosed, but estimates at the time ranged from $300,000 to over $500,000. In 1972 money, adjusted for inflation, that could be several million today. 3 suspects were identified but never arrested. One had died in a car accident weeks after the robbery. Another had disappeared completely. The third was Margaret Morrison, who'd married and changed her name 2 decades earlier, making her harder to track. She'd been questioned once, then released. No evidence directly tied her to the crime. The case had gone cold. Margaret had been a suspect. Not convicted, not even arrested, but suspected. The money had never been recovered. And now Maya knew why. She found one more detail that made her chest tight. The bank that had been robbed had been owned by a family named Morrison. Margaret's family. Her father had been the president. Her brother had been the manager. The robbery had destroyed the bank's reputation and finances. It had closed within a year. Her father had died shortly after, reportedly from stress. Her brother had moved away and cut all contact with Margaret. Margaret hadn't just stolen money. She'd stolen from her own family, destroyed them in the process. And then she'd hidden the money in a garden for 50 years, never using it, never benefiting from it, just keeping it, protecting it, preserving it. Why? What had been the point? Maya stared at the screen, trying to understand her grandmother's choices. If guilt had stopped Margaret from using the money, why not return it? Why not anonymously arrange for it to be found? Why hold on to it through decades, designing elaborate hiding places and clues if she never intended to benefit from the theft? Unless the clues weren't for Margaret's benefit. Unless they were for someone else. For family. For a granddaughter she'd barely known, but had left everything to in her will. Maya closed her laptop and stared at the ceiling. Margaret had left her a test, or a gift, or a curse. 3 interpretations of the same discovery, each one pulling her in a different direction. She could report the money, turn it over to authorities, clear her conscience, and walk away with nothing but moral superiority. Emma would still face homelessness, but at least Maya would have done the right thing. She could take the money, use enough to solve their immediate crisis, hide the rest, and hope no one ever connected her windfall to a 50-year-old bank robbery. It would save them, and it would make her exactly what the law would call her, a thief. Or she could do what Margaret had done. Keep the secret, preserve the money, and pass the problem to someone else. Walk away from both the money and the guilt. Let time and decay eventually solve what conscience couldn't. None of the options felt right. All of them felt impossible. Maya must have fallen asleep eventually, because she woke to Emma shaking her shoulder. Morning had come too quickly. Another day closer to eviction. Another day of knowing what lay beneath that garden while pretending her life was normal. She got Emma ready for school, kissed her goodbye, and drove to work. The coffee shop felt like a performance now. Smiling at customers, making drinks, cleaning tables. Playing the role of a woman whose biggest problem was making rent. Not a woman standing at the edge of a decision that would define the rest of her life. Her supervisor noticed her distraction, asked if everything was okay. Maya said she was fine, just tired. The lie came easily now. She'd been lying about being fine for so long that the words had no weight anymore. During her break, she drove to the property. Not to open the vault again, just to stand in the garden and think. The raised beds stretched around her, their pattern visible now that she knew to look for it. Morrison, her grandmother's name, grown in plants, pointing down to a vault full of money Margaret had never spent. Why? The question consumed her. Why steal money you wouldn't use? Why hide it so carefully if you never intended to benefit from it? What had Margaret been thinking during all those years of gardening above a fortune she'd locked away? Maya stood there for an hour, maybe more, trying to understand. Then she noticed something she'd missed before. Near the stone marker with Margaret's wedding date, partially hidden by the clear vegetation, was another stone. Smaller, rougher. She knelt and brushed away the dirt. Letters had been carved into it, crude but legible, for those who come after. Choose better. Maya read the words 3 times. Choose better. Not take better. Not use better. Choose better. It hit her then, with the weight of understanding that changes everything. Margaret hadn't hidden the money for herself. She'd hidden it as a test. For family. For whoever would inherit her property and have the patience to uncover her secrets. The money wasn't the point. The choice was the point. Margaret had stolen and regretted it. Had hidden the money because returning it would expose her crime, but using it would compound her guilt. So she'd done neither. She preserved it, along with a message carved in stone. For those who come after. Choose better. Maya sat back, the full weight of Margaret's legacy settling over her. Her grandmother had left her more than property and money. She'd left a moral inheritance. A question that had no easy answer. What would Maya choose? Would she take the easy path that Margaret had avoided? Or would she find another way? The eviction was 11 days away now. The vault held more money than she'd see in a lifetime. And Margaret's words echoed in the garden. Choose better. Maya didn't know what better looked like yet. But for the first time since finding the money, she understood that finding out was the real inheritance. The money was just a test. Maya didn't open the vault again for 3 days. She went to work, took care of Emma, and spent her free hours clearing more of the garden. The physical labor helped her think, pulled weed and cut vine, giving her mind space to work through the impossible decision she faced. 8 days until eviction. The number hung over everything like a countdown timer on a bomb. She'd stopped looking at apartment listings, stopped calculating how to stretch money she didn't have. The vault had made all of that feel absurd. She had access to more money than she needed, and she couldn't touch it without becoming exactly what her grandmother had been, a thief. Emma noticed the change in her mother's mood. "Are you sad about the house?" she asked one evening over dinner. Maya looked at her daughter, this small person who trusted her completely to make the right choices. "I'm trying to figure something out, sweetheart. Something complicated. Is it about Grandma Margaret?" The question surprised Maya. She'd barely mentioned Margaret beyond explaining the inheritance. "What makes you ask that?" Emma shrugged, pushing pasta around her plate. "You look like you do when you try to understand my math homework. Like you're solving a puzzle, but the pieces don't fit right." Maya felt tears prick her eyes. Her daughter was too perceptive, too smart, too aware of adult problems she shouldn't have to think about. "Yeah, it's kind of like that. Maybe you need to see the whole puzzle. Sometimes I have to dump all the pieces out and look at them before I can see how they go together." The simple wisdom of it struck Maya hard. She'd been so focused on the money itself, what it meant, what she should do with it, that she hadn't stepped back to see the complete picture. Margaret hadn't just left money. She'd left a story, told in garden beds and stone markers and locked vaults. And Maya had only read part of it. The next morning, after dropping Emma at school, Maya drove to the county clerk's office. She requested property records, not just for her land, but for the entire area. If Margaret had been telling a story, maybe the property itself held more chapters. The clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, pulled up the digital records first, then disappeared into a back room to retrieve older paper files. She returned with a box of documents that smelled like dust and old decisions. Maya spent hours going through them. Margaret had purchased the property in 1973, a year after the bank robbery. She'd paid cash, $22,000, which was above market value at the time. The previous owner had been eager to sell. The land had been listed as agricultural, but hadn't been farmed in decades. But further back, Maya found something interesting. Before the previous owner, the property had belonged to the Morrison family bank. It had been used as collateral for a loan that had defaulted during the Depression. The bank had held it for 40 years, never developing it, never selling it, just holding it as an asset on their books. Margaret hadn't just bought random property. She bought back her family's land that had been lost in the economic collapse that had shaped her parents' generation. Land that had probably meant something to the Morrisons before the bank that bore their name had been destroyed. Maya photographed the records and continued digging. She found newspaper articles about the Morrison family. They'd been prominent in the area in the early 1900s. Banking, yes, but also agriculture. The land Maya now owned had been the original Morrison farm. The bank had come later, built on the wealth generated by the farm. One article from 1931 showed a photograph of the Morrison family at a harvest celebration. A young girl stood at the edge of the group, maybe 4 years old, holding her father's hand. The caption identified her as Margaret Morrison. She was standing in what looked like the same garden Maya had been clearing decades before it became overgrown. Margaret had grown up on this land, had helped her father farm it, had watched her family lose it during hard times. And 50 years later, she'd used stolen money to buy it back, then hidden that money beneath the earth where her childhood garden had been. It wasn't about the money at all. It was about the land, about restoring something that had been lost, about returning to a place that meant home before everything fell apart. Maya sat back. The pieces of the puzzle finally started to fit together. Margaret hadn't stolen out of greed. She'd stolen to reclaim something she believed belonged to her family. The bank robbery had targeted the institution that bore her family's name but was no longer controlled by them. In Margaret's mind, maybe she hadn't been stealing at all. Maybe she'd been taking back what had been taken from her. That didn't make it right, but it made it human. Complicated, A wrong choice made for reasons that felt justified at the time. And then Margaret had spent the rest of her life unable to undo that choice, unable to use what she'd taken, unable to find a way forward that didn't compound the original wrong. Choose better. Margaret's message wasn't asking Maya to judge her grandmother's choice. It was asking Maya to learn from it, to find a third option that Margaret had never been able to see. Maya drove back to the property with new purpose. She walked through the cleared sections of the garden, seeing it now as Margaret must have seen it. Not just a vegetable garden, but a restoration. An attempt to rebuild something that had been destroyed. The raised beds, the greenhouse, the careful planning. All of it was Margaret trying to reclaim a childhood that had been lost to economic forces beyond her control. She stood at the center of the garden, where the letters of Margaret's name intersected. This spot would have been the heart of the original farm garden. The place where a little girl had learned about growing things from her father. Before the Depression, before the bank failures, before desperation led to choices that haunted a lifetime. Maya understood now why Margaret had never used the money. Using it would mean accepting that the theft had been necessary, that there had been no other way to get back what she'd lost. By never touching the money, Margaret had preserved the possibility that she could have chosen differently, that there had been another path she'd been too hurt and angry to see at the time. But Margaret had also preserved the money itself, kept it safe, protected it, and left clues for someone to find it. That meant something too. It meant she'd wanted someone to have a choice she'd never allowed herself. A chance to do something she couldn't. The eviction was 6 days away. Maya needed to decide soon. But now she knew what she was really deciding. Not whether to use stolen money, but what story she would tell with her own choices. Whether she would let desperation justify wrong actions, or whether she could find another way forward even when every option seemed impossible. She pulled out her phone and called the lawyer who'd handled Margaret's estate. James Chun answered on the second ring. Ms. Torres, how can I help you? I need to know something about my grandmother. About her will. Did she leave anything besides the property? Papers rustled in the background. Let me check the file. There were no liquid assets to speak of. The property was the entirety of the estate. Why do you ask? Did she leave any letters? Instructions? Anything that explained why she left everything to me? Actually, yes. There was a letter. It was marked to be delivered only if you claimed the property and held it for at least 30 days. You haven't reached that threshold yet, so I haven't sent it. Maya's heart hammered. Can you read it to me now? I'm not supposed to, he paused. But given the circumstances, I suppose there's no harm. Hold on. More rustling. Then Chin's voice, reading words Margaret had written years before her death. To my granddaughter Maya, if you are reading this, it means you've stayed. Most people would have walked away. The house is too damaged. The work is too hard. Life makes easier paths available, even if those paths lead nowhere good. But you stayed. That tells me something about who you are. I made choices I regretted. I took something that wasn't mine because I convinced myself I had a right to it. I was wrong. The land was never really mine just because my family once owned it. The money was never mine just because a bank with my family's name had it. I let hurt and anger guide me, and I spent 50 years living with the consequences. If you've cleared the garden, you've found what I hid. If you follow the clues, you know what's there. Now you have a choice I never allowed myself. You can take it, use it, save yourself with money that was stolen. I won't judge you. Desperation makes philosophers of us all, and philosophy doesn't pay rent. Where you can choose differently, not because it's easy, but because it's possible to build something real on honest ground. I never learned that lesson until too late. The garden taught me, eventually, you can't force things to grow in poisoned soil. You have to clear the ground, start clean, plant with patience. The land is yours, truly yours. I paid for it with money that wasn't mine, but time and taxes have made it legitimate. What you do with what's beneath it, that's your story to write. Choose better than I did. Choose true north instead of magnetic north. They're not the same thing. With whatever love I have left to give, Margaret Helen Morrison Kowalski. Chun finished reading. The line was quiet for a long moment. Miss Torres? Are you still there? I'm here, Maya managed. Thank you for reading that. Does it help with whatever you're trying to figure out? More than you know. After hanging up, Maya sat in her car and let the tears come. Margaret had known, had understood exactly what she was leaving behind. Not just money, but a test. A chance for Maya to prove that different choices were possible even under the weight of desperate circumstances. Choose true north instead of magnetic north. They're not the same thing. Maya had been oriented toward survival for so long that she'd forgotten to check if survival was actually taking her where she needed to go. Magnetic north pulled toward whatever seemed easiest, quickest, most immediately available. True north pointed toward something harder to reach, but more solid when you got there. The money was magnetic north. It would solve her immediate problems, and it would compromise everything else. She'd spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, wondering when someone would connect the dots, teaching Emma that desperation justified anything. Becoming Margaret, a woman haunted by choices she couldn't undo. True north meant something different, something harder. Maya drove to the library and asked for help accessing legal databases. The librarian, sensing desperation, bent the rules and gave her extended access. Maya spent the rest of the day researching laws about found money, stolen property, and statutes of limitations. What she learned was both crushing and liberating. The money in the vault was still legally stolen property, regardless of how much time had passed. Statute of limitations meant Margaret couldn't be prosecuted for the crime, but it didn't make the money legitimate. If Maya used it, she could be charged with theft or receiving stolen property. The penalties were serious, but there were also protocols for returning recovered stolen property. Processes designed to handle exactly this situation. If she reported the find, turned over the money, and cooperated with investigators, she wouldn't face charges. The money would be returned to its rightful owners, or more likely, to the insurance company that had paid out the claim decades ago. She would get nothing. No reward, no finder's fee, nothing but the legal bills for establishing that the property where the money was found was legitimately hers. She'd be exactly where she started. Broke, facing eviction, with no options. Except she'd have something Margaret never had. A clear conscience. The ability to tell her daughter the truth about what she'd found and what she'd chosen. The knowledge that she'd built whatever came next on honest ground. Maya closed the laptop and walked outside. The late afternoon sun was warm on her face. Emma would be getting out of school soon. 5 days until eviction. And Maya finally knew what she was going to do. She picked up Emma and drove straight to the property. Her daughter looked at her questioningly, but didn't ask why. She'd learned to trust that her mother had reasons, even when they weren't immediately clear. They walked through the garden together, Maya pointing out things she'd learned. Your great-grandmother grew up here. This was her family's farm. She lost it when she was young, and she spent her whole life trying to get it back. Did she succeed? Emma asked. In a way. She bought the land back eventually. But by then, she'd made choices that meant she couldn't really enjoy it. She spent the rest of her life taking care of something she couldn't fully claim. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, is that what we're going to do? Take care of something we can't claim? Maya looked at her daughter, this wise, observant 8-year-old who saw through everything. No, sweetheart, we're going to take care of something we can claim. We're going to build something real here, even if it takes longer than we want. Are we going to lose our apartment? There was no point in lying. Yes. Probably. Will we be homeless? For a little while. But I'm going to figure it out. We'll stay somewhere safe. And we'll work on this property every day. Clear it, fix it, make it beautiful. And when it's ready, we'll sell it for real money. Legal money. Money that belongs to us. Emma looked around at the clear garden beds, the greenhouse skeleton, the massive amount of work still remaining. That's going to take a long time. Yes, it is. What if people laugh at us? For living in our car and working on a broken house. Maya knelt so she was eye level with her daughter. Some people will laugh. Some people will think we're stupid for not taking the easy path. But we'll know the truth. We'll know we chose to build something real instead of building on lies. That matters more than what people think. Like Grandma's message. Choose better. Exactly like that. They worked in the garden until dark, clearing more beds, pulling more weeds, slowly revealing the patterns Margaret had planted decades before. When they left, Maya locked the greenhouse carefully. She'd already decided what she would do tomorrow. That night, Maya wrote everything down. Every detail of how she'd found the vault, what it contained, where it came from. She documented dates, took photos, created a complete record. Then she called James Chun again. "I need you to arrange a meeting with law enforcement," she said. "I found something on my property that needs to be reported." Chun was quiet for a moment. "Are you certain? Once you report something, there's no taking it back." "I'm certain." "All right, I'll make the calls." "This is the right thing, Miss Torres. It won't feel like it immediately, but it is." "I know." The meeting happened 2 days later. Maya sat in a conference room with a detective, an FBI agent, and James Chun. She told them everything, showed them her documentation, led them to the property, and opened the vault, watched as they photographed the money, cataloged it, began the process of confirming its origin. The detective was kind about it. "You did the right thing. A lot of people wouldn't have. Can I ask what happens now?" "To the money. It'll be processed as recovered stolen property. The insurance company that paid out the claim will likely receive it. There's a small possibility of a reward, but don't count on it. These things take years to settle. And the property? My land. It's yours free and clear. You inherited it legitimately. The fact that your grandmother used stolen money to purchase it 50 years ago doesn't change your legal ownership now." Maya nodded. That's what her research had suggested, but hearing it confirmed helped. "So I can sell it?" "Absolutely. Though I'd recommend waiting until this investigation concludes. It'll make the title easier to clear. 3 days until eviction." The vault was empty now, sealed by evidence tape. The money that could have saved her was gone, returned to whatever corporate entity had the best legal claim to it. Maya had nothing to show for her honesty except paperwork and a clear conscience. She and Emma moved out of the apartment on the final day. Everything they owned fit in the car with room to spare. Years of poverty had taught them to live light. They drove to the property and parked near the house. It was still uninhabitable, but the car was shelter enough for now. Word got around quickly in small towns. The woman who'd found stolen money and turned it in instead of keeping it. People stopped by the property, curious. Some brought supplies, tarps, camping gear, food. Others offered advice about fixing up the house. A few shared their own stories of hard times and difficult choices. Harold, the neighbor who'd known Margaret, showed up with his pickup truck full of tools. "Your grandmother was stubborn. Looks like you inherited that too. I'm too old to do much physical work, but I can teach you how to use these properly." A woman from the town historical society came by with photographs of the property from the 1920s. "This farm was beautiful once. If you're trying to restore it, these might help." Slowly, grudgingly, the community began to invest in what Maya was trying to do. Not with money. No one had money to spare, but with time, knowledge, and presence. People showed up on weekends to help clear land. Someone donated windows salvaged from a demolished building. A contractor offered to assess the house for free and create a realistic repair plan. Emma enrolled in the local school, riding a bus that picked her up at the property line. She told classmates about living in a car and working to restore a garden that spelled her great-grandmother's name in plants. Some kids made fun of her. Others thought it was the coolest thing they'd ever heard. Maya worked 3 jobs now. The coffee shop, plus evening cleaning work, plus weekend hours at a garden center where she was learning about plants. Every dollar went into materials for the property. Progress was slow, but it was progress. Real progress, built on honest work. 2 months after turning in the money, Maya received a letter from the insurance company. They'd confirmed the recovery and processed the claim. In accordance with state law governing recovered stolen property, she was entitled to a finder's fee of 10% after administrative costs. The check was for $47,000. Maya stared at it for a long time. It wasn't the $500,000 that had been in the vault, but it was honest money. Money she'd earned through making the harder choice. Money that was truly hers. She used it carefully. First, to rent a small apartment in town while the house was being repaired. Then for materials and labor to make the structure habitable. The rest went into savings, a cushion against emergencies. For the first time in her adult life, Maya wasn't living paycheck to paycheck. The work on the property continued. The house slowly transformed from ruin to restoration. The garden beds were cleared completely, revealing Margaret's design in full. Maya replanted some of them, growing vegetables and flowers that had been part of the original farm. She kept the pattern of Morrison spelled out in the layout, but changed what grew there from wild chaos to intentional beauty. The greenhouse became her focus. She rebuilt it with help from volunteers, replacing glass and metal, restoring it to functionality. Inside, she set up a small business growing seedlings to sell at the local farmer's market. It didn't make much money, but it made enough. And it felt right, using the space where Margaret had hidden her secrets to grow something new and honest. Emma thrived. The instability of their early months was replaced by routine and purpose. She had her own small garden plot, where she grew flowers she'd started from seeds. She told visitors the story of how they'd found the vault, how her mother had made the hard choice, how they'd built their life from that decision. One afternoon, nearly a year after Maya had first seen the property, she stood at the center of the garden with Emma. The house behind them was finished, not perfect but solid in theirs. The garden around them was productive and beautiful. The greenhouse gleamed in the afternoon light, full of growing things that would be sold to build more of their future. "Do you think Grandma Margaret would be happy?" Emma asked. "About what we did?" Maya thought about the letter Margaret had left, about choosing true north, about building on honest ground. "I think she'd be proud. We did what she couldn't do. We chose better. Was it worth it? All the hard parts." Maya looked at the garden, at the restored house, at her daughter who'd learned that hard choices and right choices were sometimes the same thing. She thought about the months in the car, the exhaustion, the moments when giving up felt like the only sane option. She thought about the money she'd turned in, knowing what it cost her. "Yes," she said simply. "It was worth it." They walked back toward the house together. Somewhere beneath the garden, the empty vault remained, its doors sealed with evidence tape that would eventually be removed. The space that had once held stolen money now held nothing but air and darkness. But above it, life grew strong and true. Maya had learned what Margaret spent 50 years trying to understand. You couldn't build a real future on a foundation of wrong choices. The ground had to be clear first, honest, clean. Only then could you plant something that would last. The roots spell Grandma's maiden name. The vault had $518,000, and Maya had chosen better. That was the real inheritance. Not money or land, but the wisdom to know that some paths led forward while others only led in circles. She'd found true north, and she was heading there one honest step at a time. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.